Participants, welcome to our Zoom online seminar in the series 1,000 Places in One World. Today, January the 9th, 2024 at 4:15, presented today by the Collective for Women Philosophers in India. The title of today's presentation is Absent Women's Voices in Classical, Modern and Contemporary Indian Philosophy. The Collective for Women Philosophers in India is a collective of like-minded philosophers working on exploring the gender gap within the philosophical discourse and Indian thinkers more broadly. Their efforts and work towards recognizing female philosophers' contributions can be accessed at the www.cwpindi.com webpage. Our seminar, 1,000 Places in One World, is a collaboration of intercultural and intercontinental partners. Its aim is to revive, to interpret and to preserve the cultural and intellectual heritage of women philosophers. My name is Ruth Hagengruber, and I'm very honored, and I give a dear and warm welcome to the guests today. So another welcome to our presenters of our session today, the member of the Collective for Women Philosophers in India. It's my really a great pleasure. It's a great honor. I think we have already reached something in being together today. So again, a warm welcome to Professor Dr. Richa. Shukla. I give you a short presentation what she did. She is Professor of Philosophy at the Humanities, Social Sciences and Management Department at the Indian Institute of Technology in Bhubaneswar. And she did her PhD on Dialogues in Silence, a feminist study of mourning, shame and vulnerability in the Indian domain. She is one of the co-founders of the Collective for Women Philosophers in India, and I ask you all to go on the web pages of the members who present our section today. Professor Richa Shukla is a certified philosophical counselor for the American Philosophical Association. She is present in digital media and has published widely. Professor Muzaffar Ali is also professor at the Department of Philosophy at the Savitribai Phule Pune University in Pune, India. He also taught for a certain time at the Hindu College in Delhi, and his focus in research and teaching is on social and political philosophy and contemporary Indian philosophy, with an emphasis on the idea of the public sphere and its normative implications. Okay, there is some question, I'm sorry. Yeah, that came to me now. So sorry, Professor Muzaffar Ali, but I continue and I will inform our audience that you have been in Germany. I think we never talked about the place where you have been. So he was in Germany with the DRD, and he also worked on Habermas and did a monograph on India, Habermas and the normative structure of public sphere. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Mansi Rathour, who is a lecturer of philosophy at the O.P. Jindal Global University in Sonipat, Haryana, Her broader areas of interest are social and political philosophy, with a specific competence in ethics of war, political legitimacy, and the politics of feminist epistemology. She has published on ethics, ecology, environment, and conversation. And yes, I'm looking very much forward, but I would also like to mention that she is making great efforts to bring philosophy to the public, and so you can find material from her. She's also very present in the social media, and you can find material from her on the Barefoot Philosophers, Quinton Feminism in India, and she's also one of the co-founders of the Collective for Women Philosophers in India. A few words also on how we will proceed here. So let me repeat that I'm really very honored and that I thank my guests to take over this lecture and to inform the community worldwide. We have guests here from all over Europe and other continents here. And I think this is the first step in the right direction. Our guests will present their ideas to us in about 45 minutes. Then we have about 50 minutes for Q&A. While the presentation of our presenters is recorded, no one from the audience and no participants in the seminars will be recorded. And also the Q&A are not recorded. And with these few words at the beginning from my side, I hand now over to Dr. Richa Shukla to manage the lecture with her colleagues.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for a wonderful and a brief introduction. As a collective, we are thankful to the center and to your entire team for providing us this opportunity where we can collectively talk about the kind of work which we have been doing, and largely going back to the title about women's absence, how do we look at it from Indian domain? So I would request Mansi to kindly share her screen so that the PPT can be visible to everyone.
I don't have the option to be sharing screen. I host will have to.
Shall I share the screen?
I don't.
So thank you so much, Muzaffar, for sharing your screen. I would be asking you to do to and fro as long as three of us are presenting. Okay. So hello everyone. I am Richa, and today we would be covering the larger theme of absent women's voices. We would be talking. We'll be sharing our opinion and our work, which we have been doing from these three eras, which depicts Indian domain. I would be specifically talking about the classical or Vedic domain, that based on my limited knowledge of whatever rereading of certain Vedic scriptures, Hindu scriptures, which I am doing, what kind of names of women philosophers have come across, which will be continued by Dr. Muzaffar Ali's presentation, where he would be talking about modern perspective when he would be sharing his view and his work on absent women's voices. And the session would be concluded by our colleagues Mansi's work, where she would be talking about contemporary Indian women philosophers' voice. So before we move in further, firstly, I would just request Muzaffar to go to the second slide. So I could just explain everyone exactly what CWPI is all about.
Sorry, Richa, sorry to interrupt. I can share my screen now, if that's okay.
I think Muzaffar has done it, it's fine, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So quickly, if I could tell everyone, and I believe Dr. Root has already been kind enough to explain and give a very brief introduction about our collective. So Collective for Women Philosophers in India was established by three of us, me, Muzaffar and Mansi, close to 2.5, 3 years back. And the intention behind establishing something like this was, firstly, we wanted to acknowledge and spread awareness about the academic and non-academic aspects of women's underrepresentation within the wider philosophical community in India. And I believe this is, so far when I say this, perhaps might be the only collective in the Indian domain which has been established and which is working to try to look for the reason behind gender gap, if that would be the correct term to use. Secondly, one of the intention behind which collective was formed was that we wanted to recognize and develop a space to showcase the women philosophers in India and their research works. Now, the second intention is something which all three of us would be fulfilling today from classical, modern, and contemporary perspective. And the third was that we wanted to create a space for women philosophers to support and collaborate with each other for philosophical projects. I would encourage all of you to go to our website and see the kind of work we have been doing. Muzaffar, could I request you to go to the next slide? Next. So I am a philosopher and I'm currently stationed at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Bhubaneswar. Before I talk about what exactly have I been working for the past 2.5 years, I was interested, even though my work has largely been in the field of feminist phenomenology, but it's been 2-3 years that I have been interested in trying to look for different voices which exist in the Indian philosophical domain. And when all of us were in the process of forming this collective, I stumbled upon certain Vedic scriptures. And with the help of my Guruji, because these scriptures are largely in Sanskrit, we have been doing translation of these scriptures. And in the process of doing that, we realized that these scriptures are full of narratives of women, whether they have been established as philosophers, as public intellectuals, as women who have led single life, lots of debates, dissents, which they have been showing. But for some reason, unfortunately, at some point of time, I could not find that somewhere getting captured in the Indian curriculum, or perhaps the way we largely understand philosophy to be. So I wanted to begin this my side of the presentation by asking and like putting forth this question in front of all of you, that how does a philosopher begin a philosophical work if not by saying something about women's voice in philosophy? That why something like this, why a gendered aspect of philosophy is needed. And somewhere or the other, my position comes from the notion that philosophy isn't always about what's speakable and what can be said, but it's largely also about what's hidden, the way Wittgenstein said in the Tractatus. So when I am right now presenting my work, I am also trying to understand, I'm speaking from the intention that what exactly happened when we bring back certain gendered voices which have been existing in the Vedic or the classical domain. Now, the question through which I have been analyzing these texts is that do we get a different understanding of great male thinkers or philosophers when we gender the discourse? Also, I would like to make a qualification that in Vedic philosophy, discourses aren't centered around gender per se, because the concept of Atma or soul or body has a different connotation altogether. But we do end up finding a lot of dialogues, a lot of debates, a lot of discussions which are happening between different categories of women. We find very different notion of marriages. We find very different notion of what a progressive society should be. We find very different notion of what that they can be daughters and they cannot get married. So versus how we try to understand that how XYZ society should function. So Muzaffar, I'll request you to move to the another slide.
It's not moving. Yeah, it's moving.
Yeah, it's fine. So going back to this point which I was raising, that philosophy is also about what's deep in the becoming of this consciousness. I am not endorsing any abstract reductionist moral position. Rather, I'm arguing for a gendered moral reasoning which is needed. And somewhere or the other, this gendered understanding rests on criticizing and correcting, also understanding, operating the way our moral beliefs and practices are gendered in nature. So, Muzaffar, I'll request you to go to another slide. So when I was in my graduation and perhaps trying to understand what philosophy is, and like any undergrad student, I was very lost, but I could not, I wasn't very comfortable with the fact that why philosophy is being understood by 10 white men, to be very honest, despite of the fact that philosophy, especially in Indian domain, has such rich cultural heritage of how we have understood it, why it has always been those 10 white philosophers through which we have understood it. And I think by the time I was in master's, I was comfortable with the notion that differences are good in philosophical domain as well. And something which we also have been arguing on the behalf of collective as well, that if you have a canon which is more colorful, it will just add to more voices, something which also this center is trying to do. So it's also somewhere along these lines that I started rereading certain Hindu Vedic texts, and I would be presenting certain concepts and certain names which I have found so far. And while talking about this diversity, which right now Collective is talking about, which also this center is trying to establish, I realized that this diversity was missing, especially when I was trying to understand philosophy as an undergraduate student. When I started reading philosophy, I chose to do, also I could see a difference in how this gender gap used to function in my undergraduate classes. While the male professors portrayed themselves as philosophers while teaching Kant, Hume, and Aristotle, female faculty members were only seen as teachers or mediators who were teaching that this is how you read philosophy, this is how you understand philosophy. Hence, the gender binary was present in the Indian philosophical domain as well, where there was a binary of philosophers versus teachers. So there are teachers who are female who are teaching you philosophy versus there are male professors who are philosophers out there. And I think it was somewhere on, I think this thought was also something which I wanted to further reflect and contemplate. And that's why perhaps this entire interaction with Vedic domain started in my case. Muzaffar, I'll request you to go to the next slide. Now, why these voices are important, one can think of, because now everyone is talking about decolonizing philosophy. People are talking about these kinds of voices are important. But my position is that why these voices are important, especially when I actually started with the qualification that Indian philosophy per se or Vedic philosophy per se doesn't believe in the concept of gender. I would like to strongly argue that these voices, which I'll be talking about in the next few slides, these voices are important because They have the phenomenological capability of establishing themselves as sources of knowledge, as sources of epistemic credibility. These are the voices of women who have also been somewhere or the other, marginalized would not be the correct word, sidelined in the tradition or in the interpretation of the tradition, and why it becomes important. These voices, they convey to us a hidden relationship between philosophical domain and the category of woman. Sometimes it also adds in making it, in single quote, lost or misheard voices. So this project, the next few slides, which I'll be sharing with you, will try to bring back these lost voices or misheard voices. Now, if I quickly come to Vedic philosophy has long been debated, critiqued, and dismissed. Debated and critiqued as that's one of the core spiritual Hindu values, dismissed as it has largely been considered as a theme which only engages in spiritualism and abstraction. Now, when we talk about this particular set of Vedic philosophy, why does it become important? It becomes important because it gives us a glimpse of who we used to be, not because it only gives us a glimpse of who we used to be, where we are coming from, but also because if we do a symptomatic reading of these texts, it gives us an idea of who can be a knower, who has been a knower or a subject so far. So one of the canonical Hindu texts, which is Rig Veda, and whatever limited interpretation and rereading, which I'll be sharing with all of you, would be from Rig Veda itself. And I would like to argue that when we reread certain text, somewhere or the other, we do get lots of names, lots of interpretations, lots of dialogues, which has happened at some point of time. So the idea of misheard or lost voices can be bridged, perhaps. And my hunch is, and I could be wrong as well, but why, if something which has already been documented, and versus when we look at it, that why these women are not part of our curriculum? Why are we not talking about them? So my position so far is, which might also change in future, but I think my hunch is that this can also happen. This might have also happened largely because the interpretation of philosophy has largely been done by men. Largely being done by men, or rather perhaps maybe because philosophy might have been interpreted in a masculine manner. So maybe that could be the reason that these voices ended up coming into the category of lost or misheard, and here I am trying to establish something which is already. Muzaffar, could you go to the next slide? Now, if I talk about Vedic times, so Rigved mentions that during Vedic times, there has been a distinction between two categories of women. The first is called as Brahmavadini. Now, Brahmavadini gets translated into scholarly women who didn't get married. They chose to dedicate their life to knowledge and wisdom. And the other category of knowledge is called as Rajaswala. This would get translated into these women belong to the realm of domesticity. They reproduce, they had family. My work seeks to look into the former category and investigate into the latter in terms of their presence, descent, and responsibilities. Muzaffar, next slide, please. The second concept, after this distinction which has been made in Vedic scripture, the second concept which is very prominent is the concept of Rishi Patni or Rishikaye. So what exactly is this concept all about? Rishi Patni, these are women scholars, wives of public intellectuals, which were at that point of time called as rishis, who used to participate in debates and dialogues. Somewhere or the other, these women have become unnamed women who are lost in Hindu or Vedic traditions. These voices are of philosophical importance as they have the possibility to make us think about the possible reasons behind gender gap, if it even it exists in the Indian philosophical domain. Muzaffar, next slide, please. Now, if I give you one example or perhaps illustration from the Rig Veda, so the concept of veil or ghungat, the way we understand it, it hasn't been propagated in the Rig Veda. And I've also mentioned the shlok number and the hymn number if you actually look at it. When you read these kinds of scriptures, it gives you a very progressive understanding of how they have understood the category of woman, how they have understood concepts like menstruation, how they are interpreting that the society should be. Now, specifically in Rig Veda, when we are talking about the concept of rishikais or women who were public intellectual, there are 25 rishikais which have been mentioned. Muzaffar, next slide, please. So far, I have been able to work on these 10 Rishi Patnis or Rishikais. These are women who were largely perceived and seen as public intellectuals. Rigved is full of their dialogues and debates, whether it's of dissent, whether it's about acting as wonderful teachers, whether it's about acting as wonderful public intellectuals, critical thinkers. And these names are as follows. The first name is Ghosha. The second name is Godha. The third name is Vishwavara. Fourth name is Shraddha Kamayani. Fifth name is Medha. Sixth name is Shachi. Seventh name is Polemy. Eighth name is Devayamaya Maha. Ninth name is Indrani. And 10th name is Urvashi. So basically with something like this, right now I am still in the process of documenting the translation because it's only in Sanskrit. So documenting the debates and the dialogues which they are doing either with their husbands or with their friends, the way they are actually greeting and meeting big people, the way they are organizing big conferences. And after reading and contemplating on these names, I'm also in the process of creating a good dictionary of these not gendered voices, but perhaps women's voices, which exist in the Vedic domain. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that somewhere or the other today as a collective, we are also trying to qualify the second proposition behind which the collective was formed. Now, moving on to with my presentation, I would request Dr. Muzaffar to take it ahead and present his perspective on modern Indian women philosophers. Thank you.
So thank you, Richa. So I'll be taking over and we'll be moving into the modern era of Indian thought. So briefly, if I start with chronology, the modern Indian philosophy or modern Indian thought, it starts towards late 18th century and is at times extended to late 20th century as well. So we'll get examples as well. But there's a huge difference between the classical and modern Indian thought or Indian philosophy in that while the classical Indian philosophy is in Sanskrit and there is a language barrier, the modern Indian thought is mainly present in English. Okay, so it is not just available to diverse linguistic groups within India, it's available throughout the globe. So if the women's voices are absent from modern Indian thought, then it becomes a multi-layered problem, okay? Because the language barrier isn't there. The burden of history isn't there. It's not that distant past, it's just a recent past. So before I move on to present the work of two important modern Indian women thinkers, we need to figure out how is it that women's voices have been erased from this huge canon of what we come to know as modern Indian political philosophy or modern Indian political thought. So here we go. The first consolidated work, the first compilation of modern Indian thought that we come across, mostly it has been compiled after Indian independence in 1947. It's V.S. Naravne who wrote this text, Modern Indian Thought by V.S. Naravne. There he talks about 9 Indian political thinkers: Ramakrishnan, Ram Mohan Roy, Vivekananda, Tagore, Gandhi, Aurobindo, Radhakrishnan, Iqbal, Kumaraswamy, but none of them is women. So that's the first attempt. Okay. Then the second is contemporary Indian philosophy. A picture of the book is in front of you by B.K. Lal in 1974. And there, 8 political thinkers or 8 Indian philosophers have been talked about. Okay, he brings in some new names. Vivekananda is included. K.C. Bhattacharya is included. but no woman again. Okay. Then the third attempt is made in 1986 with a book, Political Thought in Modern India, edited by Thomas Bentham and K.L. Deutsch. Okay, so it's a book on modern Indian thinkers. So here again, some new people, some new male intellectuals, men, male thinkers, or get included, but nothing is written on any Indian woman thinker or any Indian woman philosopher, although there are some new names like Ambedkar gets included, Nehru gets included, Dayanand Saraswati gets included, Tilak, Lokmanya Tilak gets included, but there is no woman. And this particular book, Thomas Bentham's book, it has been since it's an edited volume, the contributors, out of the contributors, even only one or two are women, but that's a separate debate. Then we move to one of the most audacious and one of the most comprehensive efforts that has ever been made, and that has been made by J. Garfield and Nalini Bhushan in 2011, when they wrote and came out with this reader, Indian Philosophy in English. So this is a reader. These are primary texts. And here in this text, there are around 31 primary excerpts from the works of modern Indian thinkers. And quite ironically, it's 2011 and none of them is a woman thinker, as if they don't exist, isn't it? So then from 2011, we move to recent, last year, 2022. In 2022, same authors, Surtha Kumar Malik and Ankit Tomar, they came with two texts. One was published by Routledge and one was published by Palgrave Macmillan. One is titled Revisiting Modern Indian Thought. Okay. And the one titled Revisiting Indian Modern Thought, quite interestingly, includes one modern Indian woman thinker in the name of Pandita Ramabai. Okay. And otherwise, it has around 19 thinkers, but at least we see one woman getting included. But since they have another book published same year with Palgrave Macmillan, Reappraising Modern Indian Thought, there they talk about 14 modern Indian thinkers and no woman is there. So it's like in one of their books, they give space to one woman thinker, and in the other book that's on the same theme, they don't give space to any woman thinker. And here they give space to new male thinkers like Syed Ahmad Khan, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, Veer Savarkar, and Madan Mohan Malviya. Okay. Then the last book that I have been consolidation or compilation has been by Vidyut Chakravarti and Rajendra Pandey. It's Modern Political Thought, published by Routledge. Again, they only, in 2023, that's last year, they give space to only one woman thinker, okay, and include many new male thinkers like Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, J. Prakash Narayan, etc. And they also repeat Pandita Ramabai, okay. Apart from these books that are here, there's a very interesting book, and the only one of its kind, which tries to locate the trajectory of Indian political thought from Manu. Okay, it's Foundations of Indian Political Thought by V.R. Mehta, which was published in 1992. Again, since the chronologically it starts with classical India and moves into contemporary India, there's no woman thinker or woman philosopher or woman political thinker that V.R. Mehta talks about, although the book is not here. Now, let me move to, yeah. So now, this is about individual books, but by far the most exhaustive compilation of modern Indian thought or modern Indian thinkers has been carried by Varinder Grover, who compiled the thought of around 30 Indian political thinkers in 30 volumes titled Political Thinkers of Modern India. This is the most exhaustive work that remains there and has been done on modern Indian thought. The first volume starts with Ram Mohan Roy, 1772 to 1833. And the last one, ironically, includes a thinker, S.M. Dange, from who was a communist from late 20th century. But among the 30, none of the women thinkers is compiled. There's no compilation of any woman thinker here. Now, since this is a very exhaustive compilation and mapping of Indian thinkers, it gives an impression that either women have not written anything during this period, or they have not participated in the colonial movement, which led to consolidation of this thought, because this modern Indian thought peculiarly consolidated itself into a thematic basis, as it was mostly a response to the colonial occupation, although that's not the only one. Even the social and cultural issues of Indian societies are very well debated. Thus, the question, where are women thinkers and philosophers of the modern era? So, moving on to the next slide. On the other hand, the work of women's thinkers, modern Indian women's thinkers, has been parallelly documented. And there's this book written, edited by, it's a reader, kind of a reader, Suzy Tharu and K. Lalita in 1991. And it's titled Women Writing in India, Volume 1, which is the modern era, till 20th century, which is the classical and modern era, and Volume 2, the 20th century. But what happens is that since this book has been published by Feminist Press from New York, interestingly, this categorization gives birth to the problem, as if women's writing needs to be, what should I say, needs to be clubbed into a separate basket. And there's nothing that can allow them to be part of the mainstream compilation of modern Indian thought. That's the problem. Okay, so although this compilation is there, it also, there's another problem with this compilation. Although it's a very important compilation, it's that it mixes literature, social reform, and the nationalist thought. It mixes it up. It's based on, it has poets in it, it has reformers in it, it has politicians in it, it has thinkers, all of them women. So it's more or less the only thread that binds them together is that they are women, as if they are a separate species, and they are not going to be part of the mainstream compilation of modern Indian thought. So one of the reasons that now going to the problematic, because we don't have that much of time, that why is it that even if women have very vehemently, very vigorously participated, not just participated, but taken part and contributed in the realm of modern Indian thought, why they are not there? Why their voices are absent? There's some problem with the voice. Yeah. So the case is that mostly women thinkers have been considered as mere participants and not as interlocutors. Because when you consider a particular thinker as an interlocutor, you give him an egalitarian plan, a level-headed plan, and when you consider someone as a participant can be passive, isn't it? So that's how women thinkers have usually been catalogued as far as modern Indian thought is concerned. So I'll first be beginning with Sarojini Naidu and try to argue that she was one of the few interlocutors to a dominant trend of writing around Indian nationalism. Okay, that's the first, and then we'll move to another modern Indian woman thinker, that is Tarabai Shinde. Although Tarabai Shinde should come earlier, but I thought that I should begin with Sarojini Naidu and then move to Tarabai Shinde. So Sarojini Naidu was an Indian political thinker, a freedom activist, from 1879 to 1949. One of the most important books on her writings are Speeches and Writings of Sarojini Naidu, 1919, and then 1825, and continuously being reprinted. It's the most exhaustive book on her work. Although she also has collections of poetry. And there is another interesting book by V.S. Naravane, who was the first one to catalog modern Indian thought, but it seems he decided to write a separate book on Sarojini Naidu rather than including her in the compilation, which is titled Sarojini Naidu, An Introduction to Her Life, Work and Poetry. Okay. And Sarojini Naidu is a very vocal champion of what in modern Indian political thought is called as inclusive nationalism, syncretic culture, or composite culture. Okay, so during the Indian colonial struggle, there were mainly two trends of nationalism that were doing rounds. One trend of nationalism, or one perspective of nationalism, was the sectarian nationalism. Okay, sectarian nationalism was mostly a version of nationalism which was religion centric. Okay, which tried to center Indian nationalism around religion. So Lokmanya Tilak is one of them who wrote a piece titled "Yearning for a Hindu Nation." Lajpat Rai, he wrote on Hindu nationalism. Aurobindo Ghosh, he wrote on nationalism and religion and tried to dig into the great Indian past. Iqbal, he tried to portray the possibility of going beyond the antithetical nature of Islam and nationalism. So this was one version. And then in response to that, within this Indian thought, there was another version of nationalism, which we call as inclusive nationalism. Okay, and one of the most interesting works on nationalism in India is done by S. Irfan Habib, Nationalism in Modern Indian Thought. He very peculiarly considers Sarojini Naidu as the only one who was very aggressively following this version of inclusive nationalism, although later on many others can be added. So he's saying that she was an interlocutor to this particular version of nationalism. She was not a mere participant. And along with her, there were many other thinkers as well, like Maulana Azad, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, etc. But Sarojini Naidu was an interlocutor, not a participant. And one of her peculiar works on nationalism is about the issue of nationalism being a communal vision and not an individual vision. So she argues that if we go for defining nationalism from the perspective of an individual vision, that means from a religious vision, from a sectarian vision, it will become parochial and will not be acceptable to the Ganga Jamuni Tahzeeb of India. Okay, so, and I quote, and I'll then move to Tarabai Shinde because we don't have time, and I quote, "No more divisions, no more tyranny of communities, no more insistence on separate races. Okay, rather an ultimatum issued to the world that we are one nation." Okay, and she's like, each community can only see from one angle, but what we need, what India needs, is a combined vision of all communities, and that is only possible by forging or by discovering or by theorizing a communitarian or communal nationalist vision. That is Sarojini Naidu. So rather than just being a participant, a passive participant, Sarojini Naidu was an interlocutor, but unfortunately remains hidden, as my colleague Dr. Richa argued, or remains erased from this mainstream canon of modern Indian thought that is often available on university platforms. Then another woman thinker who deserves to be accepted in the canon of modern Indian thought is Tarabai Shinde, 1850 to 1910. She wrote a very interesting text on women's oppression, which is titled in Marathi as Stri Purush Tulna, and the translation comes to a comparison between women and men. Although no one knows about this work till 1975, and we find the first mention of this work by a compatriot of her, who is again a social reformer, Jyotiba Phule, in 1882, when he was finding Satyashodak Samaj, okay? Otherwise, there is no mention till 1975. In this book, Satyashodak Samaj, in this book, Sri Purush Tulna, what Tarabai Shinde tries to do is that she tries to be cognizant of the religious nature of Indian society and tries to first argue about the way God has created this world, or gods have created this world, and that's the theological argument. And she tries to play with God and gods being impartial, and how they have created a world which is a world of male supremacy, which is a man's world. Okay, and she argues that why is it that gods, even if they are impartial, claim to be impartial, have granted the world of happiness to men, and as far as our words are concerned, and have given nothing but agony to the world. Number one. Number two, she tries to go into the manifest misogyny in the daily discourse that is prevalent in Indian society and the literature that was printed and published around those times. So I'll go into a few arguments and then bring in one story that she talks about, or I'll just mix it up. So in those arguments, what she says is that in daily discourse, woman is considered as a device of witchcraft. Okay, so that's how the societal discourse considers women of early 19th century or late 19th century as. But she argues that since men claim to be having the power of intellect and claim to make impossible possible, so even if women are a device of witchcraft or black magic, will it hold in front of the power that man holds? Okay, so she tries to deconstruct it, that it cannot be true because you hold more power. Then she goes into the nature of women as being transgressional, as being committing adultery, or as being more focused on vanity and other stuff. And there she takes on the patriarchal nature of society and argues that the reasons for this are child marriage, and the reason for this are not allowing widow remarriage and many other things. Now, when she moves to literature, she tries to give us examples of certain novels or stories that have been circulating around that time. One of this is Manju Ghosh and another is Muktamala, and tries to argue that these particular pieces of literature try to solidify this patriarchal and misogynic character of the society. Because if we talk about the Manju Ghosh story, she argues that how that story tries to show that a woman deserted her old father because she wanted to go with her love. Okay, she says that this is mere solidification. This is mere reinforcement of a particular way the society wants to see women. That's how these stories are being printed and published. Like a term now will be that it's pulp fiction. It's in India we call it masala rather than literature. Okay, it's just that people want to read it and want to enjoy this because it reinforces their particular belief about women. So that's it. I'll now move to I'll now request my colleague Dr. Mansi.
Yes.
To
Hi, thank you, Muzaffar. You can stop sharing your screen. I'll take over the presentation slides from now.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just... Is my screen visible now?
You are muted. Unmute yourself.
Is it visible now? And am I audible?
You're audible, but we don't see the screen now. But it seems it is written here that your screen sharing has started, but it is black. We can't see anything right now. I don't know.
Continue with sharing the screen and you just present.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you, Muzaffar. So if you can just bring it on to the next slide. Yeah, over the next one. Yeah, thank you. So I'll be taking over and discussing absent women voices and their contribution to contemporary philosophy. You know, my other colleagues such as Richa and Muzaffar have already covered the ancient time as well as the modern Indian thinkers too. And it's quite crucial to be discussing these themes or ideas because as has already been discussed by Muzaffar, it poses a multifaceted challenge, the underrepresentation or perhaps the exclusion of certain voices. And then it becomes critical for us to explore these issues and even perhaps seek out ways of redressing some of these issues. And I'd like to start off by discussing some themes at the backdrop, which Richa also had brought forth through her beginning presentation, that such an exclusion of women's voices in contemporary Indian philosophy, at least, it reflects a broader lack of diversity in the field. And this particular issue even raises questions about perhaps whose perspectives are being valued or legitimized. And that can ultimately influence even the direction or even the scope of philosophical inquiry that we're heading towards. And it's not just about the underrepresentation. At many instances, such a marginalization of women's voices even contributes towards epistemic injustice, in Miranda Fricker's words. And that's what Richa had also discussed, where certain knowledge and experiences are systematically excluded, or if not excluded, then they are undervalued. And this leads to a skewed understanding, not just about the world, but it also poses these risks of us as a philosophical community or the philosophical discourse at large that may perpetuate or even reinforce these certain stereotypes, whether they are gendered stereotypes, that can potentially lead towards an incomplete or distorted philosophical frameworks, right? And that hampers the full exploration of philosophical ideas. What's the limit of philosophical exploration, or what kind of questions can be asked within this discipline? So with this collective, as all three of us have been working on the collective for women philosophers in India, we are trying to examine not just the current existing literature, ancient historical literature, trying to conduct interviews with various contemporary female philosophers, and trying to understand whether it's institutional factors or certain societal or cultural norms that can play a role in or shed further light onto the underrepresentation of these women's voices within contemporary Indian philosophy, and not just contemporary Indian philosophy, even the broader discipline of philosophy. So with the collective, our objective is then to understand what are these barriers and obstacles that may be faced by Indian philosophers, not just Indian female philosophers working in academia, but also in non-academic institutions as well. And based on various times and time zones and periods, and one may have already understood by my previous two colleagues' presentation, and when we try to problematize this issue of absent women's voices, it's not always to suggest that women didn't have a voice, but it's perhaps the case of their voice was either lost or misheard, not represented, or did not have the same sense of validity or legitimacy as certain other voices in the discourse and discipline. And that is why it's even more critical for us to be not overlooking certain voices and to have a more diverse or inclusive voices, as they offer alternative viewpoints that can or even enhance the philosophical discourse. And in my particular presentation today, I'll be covering three of these contemporary Indian women thinkers. In the next slide, yeah. One of them being Jayashree Odin, who's a literary scholar as well as the director and professor and of the program of interdisciplinary studies at University of Hawaii. Then there's Meera Nanda as well, who's an Indian writer and a historian of science. She was previously at ICER Institute in Pune, and recently in 2023, she's become a fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And we also have Sarojini Sahu, whose work I'll be covering. Again, an Indian feminist writer. She's a columnist with the New Indian Express and is an associate editor with the Chennai-based English magazine called Indian Age. So I'll move into more details about their work and philosophical relevance with each of their works, beginning with Jayashree Odin, right? So Jayashree Odin, her research primarily revolves around cultural studies of science and technology. She's also done a lot of work in literary and political ecology and ethics, systems ecology. And beyond that, also has a range of work within German philosophy, feminist angle, to even mysticism, where she's considering the relevance of Shaivite theories on higher consciousness. So, I mean, she even has various texts on, electronic text and hypertext, or post-colonial, as a post-colonial theorist. She's written on hypertext and electronic translations and texts, which, as per her, are discourses that are characterized as being multilinear or multivocal, as opposed to the traditional representation, which was univocal in nature and much more authoritarian in nature as well. And through that process and work on electronic literature and philosophy of mind as well, she's trying to create a subaltern position as well. So I'll ask Muzaffar if you can bring it on to the next slide. Jayashree Odin's work on the electronic literature, she's observed and identified that there has been a transition from the print to the electronic text, and we are in that stage in recent times today. And that is something that challenges the previously dominant sequential or linear presentation forms. And she brings in the feminist angle here as well, because that's for her, the complexities of human bodies as well as our lives. It's something that cannot be adequately described when it's just restricted to a very sequential or univocal system of representing something. And for her, hypertext is something where the writer's authority is diffused. Here is where the reader has more power to kind of decide and determine the path they wish to trace through reading of a certain text. So unlike the print text, where the dominance of the text and the print text was much more there, it forced both the writer and the reader towards a tyranny of a linear system of a method. Whereas in the hypertext, it allows for writing which can be not just organized, even reorganized in multiple ways of reading and writing. And that decentering of the text, the whole dissipation of the text has its own uniqueness, authorial uniqueness. So here, there's no dominance of the author of the text per se. The greater autonomy then is of the reader, comes with the greater amount of responsibility to be creating a newer or coherent narrative or meaning out of this dispersed text that they are reading. And that's how the reader can perhaps trace their own path through these intellect texts that they consume as reading. And this hypertext, and as a post-colonial theorist, Jayashree Odin reveals that it's a critique to these unitary models of subjectivity, that all the previous such models were based on a very binary thinking system that created these categories of between self and the other, male and the female, first world, third world, where always the first category or the term was the more privileged term. On the one hand, you have the self, the male, the first world countries, etc. And rejecting these binary models, and theorists like Jayashree Odin, who's a post-colonial theorist, they describe both subjectivity as well as experiences as being something which are decentered and much more pluralistic in nature. And with increasing digitization of information, that smoothens the pathways of global capitalism, and the flow of that capital determines the politics of the moment as well. There is this instant transmission of data, and that's created a newer era of flexible accumulation, which is now able to even adapt and make use of these differences or diversities rather. And this new hypertext aesthetic, or which she also calls the post-colonial aesthetic, is something which represents this need to switch from linear univocal or a closed authoritative system to a multilinear, non-linear or multivocal open system of aesthetic. That's based on constant negotiation and interactions between the subject. And beyond just go back to the previous slide, I think, Muzaffar. Yeah, so beyond just her work on electronic text, she's also quite a prominent figure doing a lots of translation work, where she's translated works of Lalleshwari, the famed 14th century Kashmiri mystic and poet, as well as Nanda Reshi, again belonging from Kashmir. And her other work on Through the Looking Glass, technology, nomadology, and postmodern narrative. It's been described, that text has been described as a critical exploration of visual metaphors in contemporary literature. And beyond these two of her works that I've mentioned on the slide, has written furthermore on technology-mediated narrative forms, as well as the role of technology and how we can use that to re-envision higher education space as well. Now, and some of her texts on these electronic literature have even dealt with the potential of electronic media and how they can depict minority experiences in multiple ways. So definitely quite a great deal of work on philosophy of mind and consciousness and electronic literature, which challenges the traditional assumptions and offers new perspectives on the nature of subjective experiences. I'll move over to Meera Nanda again, who's a historian of science. With several works she's authored on the intersection of science, religion, and politics. Right, she's quite an ardent critic of the influence of Hindutva or post-colonialism or post-modernism on science as well, and how that is perhaps leading towards the flourishing of a pseudoscience and Vedic science, at least in contemporary India. There's a book by her called The God Market came out in 2009, which discusses the new kind of religiosity, which examines how India is experiencing a new tide of popular Hinduism. That's been financed by rather the government itself, despite being a secular nation in characteristic. She's also written quite extensively on, at least on public platforms such as The Wire, on the ideas of faltered democracy, the notion of post-truth, and how there's an emerging regime of untruth in India, at least. And how the Indian state has sponsored for the push or encouragement for Indian knowledge systems within elite or premier educational institutions. And that's like a paradigm shift happening in India, at least, that allows for myths to be passed over as history, where certain legitimate scientific methods are being replaced by certain Indic sciences. And she's also, again, quite ardently commented on how there's also been a transition of Indians and Indian origin intellectuals also have perhaps led the charge against scientific claims of objective or universally valid science as being a colonial ploy to establish the superiority of the West. So for somebody like Meera Nanda, for her, the duality or the binary of colonial, post-colonial, again, is something she's quite wary of its influence on what it may do to something what we perhaps may understand as objective or universal science. Due to that reason, with this current zeal for introducing these Indian ways of knowing or Indic science in educational institutions, and how that's justified by its advocates as being a necessary step for decolonizing of the Indian mind. So this whole attempt to decolonize of the Indian mind, it seems like through that whole statement, the post-colonial theory is finding a new home in Hindu nationalistic ideals, at least as per Meera Nanda. And that's the new kind of trend that's been going on, at least in the contemporary times, because the postmodernist assumption, again, is that all claims to objective knowledge are disguised assertions of either colonial or Orientalist power. Again, there's a binary distinction, colonial or Orientalist. I'll move over to the third and final thinker that I'll be covering today, which is Sarojini Sahu. Again, quite just go back the previous slide there. Again, quite a literary figure, writes on gender issues and feminism. Right? Her writings on feminist philosophy and gender issues highlight the societal and cultural structures that perpetuate inequality, at least within India. And again, she has published, she's quite a few texts and novels in Odia language. And some of them, and I will accept now, it's not necessarily the case that their works haven't been published per se. For instance, many of her Odia novels have now been translated into English, such as The Dark Abode. But again, my argument or question remains, why have we never covered or studied or discussed these thinkers when we covered or understood or learned about feminist philosophy? So, for instance, in this work, one of her works called Sensible Sensuality of 2010, quite recognized one, she offers a very unique Eastern perspective on feminism, and it explores these very open, in a very open and frank way, Eastern female sexuality, and how that plays a major role in understanding what is the Eastern feminism. So for Sarojini Sahu, feminism is not equal to the gender problem. It's not a confrontational attack on the male hegemony. And this is where her stance on feminism differs from other feminist thinkers such as Virginia Woolf or Judith Butler. Because Sarojini Sahu thinks feminism should not act in opposition to men as individuals. And to her, feminism is against the oppressive and outdated social structures, which may perhaps force both men and women into positions that are false or antagonistic. And she's had quite a debatable concept, her debatable concept on feminism, in which she denies even Simone de Beauvoir's the other theory. Because for somebody like Sarojini Sahu, while she does accept and understand that woman identity is certainly constitutionally different from that of man, men and women still share a basic human equality. So the harmful asymmetric sex or gender othering that may arises, it's an accidental one or a passive one from a certain natural or unavoidable intersubjectivity. And she's somebody who thinks that people should rather emphasize their femininity rather to impose the so-called stereotype feministic attitude of the second wave of feminism. And beyond just the debatable ideas on feminism, as an Indian feminist or literary figure, her writings have dealt candidly with the idea of female sexuality, the emotional lives of women, and the intricate fabric of human relationships, depicting extensively about the interior experiences of women and how their burgeoning sexuality is seen as a threat, rather, to the traditional patriarchal societies that were quite dominant in Indian context. And that particular book, Sensible Sensuality, it has covered topics that were perhaps never discussed so far in the Indian discourse. Ideas on puberty, to menopause, to feminine sensibilities, restrictions that we have during adolescence or pregnancy, fear factors on the ideas of rape as well. So in denying, for her, again, not just denial of the patriarchal limits, for her, sexual liberation of female was the primary motive of this, or part of the social revolt by women. So for her, orgasm in the body is a natural call to feminist politics, and sexuality is something that you can, it's closely interlinked to the feminist politics. And again, sexuality for her is not something, not an entity in itself. It's something that can be related to many other aspects of culture, which is tightly linked with an individual life or even the evolution of a culture. For example, in one of her Odia literature called novels called Upanivesh, that is something which focused extensively on female sexuality as being a part of social revolt by women. And it's quite unique. A novel like that was there in Odia literature, and nobody perhaps really discussed it publicly in Indian discourse. And has quite successfully, this author and her works have, brought out the difference of sensibilities towards sexuality between male and female. So differences, sensibilities, and has her own credibility towards a frankness to be dealing with these sensitive matters. So I'll ask Muzaffar to come towards the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. These were broadly the three contemporary thinkers that I wish to bring to the fore. So, I mean, in the context of literature and history, their works of thinkers such as Jayashri Odin, Meera and Sarojini Sahu, they play a very crucial role, and in how they've amplified the voices or expressed the concerns of various other women in that geographical location as well. So, for instance, Jayashri Odin's and Sarojini Sahu, they can be clubbed together as their work provides more insights into feminist philosophy, and even the convergence, very strong, deep connection between literature and philosophy. If you date back even from ancient historical times, there's a very close connection between the disciplines of literature and literature with people who ended up being philosophers. And whereas you have somebody like Meera Nanda, on the other hand, who's exploring the impact of religion on science, and not just impact of religion on science, even the impact of the binary of colonial versus post-colonial on science. And whether it's the multilinearity of hypertext, how that should be open, and how that's contributing towards and trying to create for themselves a subaltern position or a post-colonial understanding. You have Odin and Sahu, who are on the subaltern and post-colonial theorists. Somebody like Meera Nanda is a little more wary and cautious of the impact of post-colonial theorists on science. But again, it's crucial to be discussing the work because it provides much more broader understanding of what kind of political and philosophical landscape did thinkers such as these also operate in. And that is why perhaps I feel many of their works and these thinkers and their contributions should not be overlooked. It's our responsibility rather to be discovering more works and more thinkers, to be having a much more open, diverse, and more enriched philosophical discourse. I'll stop here, and Muzaffar, you can bring it to the next final slide. Yeah, just thank you, everybody. and we have all of our contact details, all three speakers on the slide, as well as the collective's contact information. And yes, we're open for any further questions or doubts or points of further discussion.